Mixing with Mike, must-have plugin of the week is the Radix POWAIR. POWAIR is a two-stage dynamic processor. It has a loudness leveler and a compressor. The loudness leveler works off the ITU BS1770 standard. And the compressor has some unique features with punch control and adaptive compression, which we'll get into. It's a soft knee fixed threshold compressor, so you'll be driving input gain using the center knob here through the fixed threshold to determine the amount of gain reduction. It's an amazing sounding processor that is very transparent. It has a lot of powerful uses and solves a lot of very common problems that engineers have with dynamic processing, and you'll see all this in audio examples. So we'll start with a quick overview of the interface, and then we'll get into all of the settings going in by using specific examples. So we have the toolbar up at the top with undo, redo. You can load in presets from here, and you can toggle between them. It has A-B comparison, so you can copy A settings to the B side, make adjustments, and compare them. You have a settings cog up at the top here, so this allows you to set a meter peak hold and output clipping and the size of the user interface. Right now I have this set to 150%. If you find one that you like, you can set it to be the default setting, so all of your plugins open to that size. Now, let's get into the leveler setting. The leveler and the compressor can be turned on or off, so you don't have to use both. You can put them on or off to use according to the situation. The loudness leveler essentially pulls the signal level towards the target. So when you have an input signal level, primarily what you're trying to do is you want to set your target level at some in-between point so that some signal will get pulled down in level, some signal will get pulled up in level towards the target that you're looking for. The noise floor here is sort of an escape hatch, so when the signal level falls below here, no additional gain movement will be applied to the signal. The range in which the gain movement occurs is set down here with the gain range control. So this dot right down here that's half blue and half gold, when it comes up and you see signal, those two halves will separate and you'll see gain either moving towards the target from lower or downward from above, and it'll have a color accordingly which will show you which direction that it's moving. So you can set the range and amount in which it moves. How responsive it is based off of the LU integration time, which is set down here. So based on the ITU standards, the momentary and short term give you 400 milliseconds and 3 seconds of time. You can make it as long as 500 milliseconds, which can make it a very soft, gradual level change, or you can make it very responsive as fast as 50 milliseconds. So that becomes very powerful, and you could see how this is probably the most powerful tool that I've found yet that anybody's made for adjusting the overall gain of tracks, especially for things like vocals and evening them out before you start to process them. Very amazingly powerful tool. So we'll get into some audio examples with this. The compressor is a fixed threshold compressor, soft knee. The way that you drive compression into it is you drive this input gain upward into it, or the this gain control, compression control, I'll call it, which pushes signal in to the detection engine, and this drives the compression. You have an attack time and a release time. The release time can be set to musical values, so we could set this, for example, to a 16th note. If we turn this off, it'll show us the 16th note value in milliseconds if I wanted to adjust it based on that point. So that's a very powerful tool. I love using that for percussive instruments and especially drums to help the release sort of pump and breathe to the rhythm. It's a really powerful way of using it. The unique features here start with the auto makeup gain. This is the only auto makeup gain I've ever seen on any compressor plugin, and I've used a lot. That actually works. And just to put it that simple, I've never seen anything that works so effectively as this does. And what's really amazing about it is that, most auto makeup gains will always make the signal level louder on output, and so you always like the sound of it better. This actually keeps it at what sounds like the same exact level, except you actually hear the compression when you compare the plugin in and out, and that's just the most powerful thing ever. So you can actually see whether what you're doing is just making it louder or making it better sounding, because loudness, things that sound louder almost always sound better. So the way that that's done is that it uses the loudness specifications rather than just level specifications for making that auto adjustment. So it's very cool and it works. The punch control is unique. Now, the way that we normally deal with transients is that we make a faster attack time. And the faster attack time then quite often has a negative impact in reshaping of the transient. And depending upon the compressor that you're using, the shape of that and the way that it colors that attack can, be damaging to the sound. So it's always been a sticking point from the very beginning when compressors were first built, or the early broadcast limiters. So the way that POWAIR addresses this is with the punch control. So effectively, if we have an attack time of 40 milliseconds, what this will do is it will set the level of the transient signal during the attack time period. So if I have this set to 100%, this will operate like a normal compressor with a 40 millisecond attack. If I pull this down, however, this will pull all the way down to effectively what amounts to a brick wall limiter on the peak signal. So it's allowing me to adjust the way that the peak is managed by controlling its level. And you'll see that gain reduction reflected in the gain reduction meter, which will come up here along the side. Very powerful tool, and I'll show you some examples of how you can really shape the sound of something, just like a snare drum, and percussive stuff is very obvious, but you'll see how its effectiveness using other instruments as well. The other one is the adaptive compression. The adaptive compression is very unique in that what it does is it addresses a problem that quite often happens mostly with like very dynamic vocal performances or any dynamic performance where you have very low, quieter passages and then you have very loud belting passages of voice. And the most common problem that you have is that you have tons of compression when they're singing loud, no compression when they're singing low. And what happens is that will change the tonal coloration of the voice in almost all cases. So what engineers will do to accommodate for that is they'll either set a very low threshold and a very low ratio, which will make the compressor less responsive, or they automate the threshold so they can make the compressor responsive to the voice and give some gain reduction throughout the dynamics of the performance. This accomplishes it with a simple single control. By bringing this in, effectively what it does is it takes the target setting and it determines the amount of gain reduction that will occur, and it keeps that gain reduction fairly consistent throughout the performance. So it's not going to be identical in every section, but that's not the point of it. It's trying to create a consistency of the tonal character, and you could turn that off, and you could go anywhere from fully adaptive to anywhere in between. So it gives you a broad range of control over the way that works. This is a very powerful tool that can take something like just setting up a compressor for a vocal and make it happen in a minute, where normally you might spend half an hour just programming, threshold automation to keep the gain reduction consistent. Such a time saver and a very powerful tool. Okay, so getting past the compressor, and I'll show you audio examples of this. This can be operated left-right or MS. There's a separation control between either the left-right or the mid and side signal. This is also a very powerful creative tool. Down here we have the sidechain filter. It has two basic modes. It has a band pass mode, so it will reject in the detection engine any of the frequencies below this filter and above this filter. So it's a way of filtering out like low-end rumble and things that might gum up the works with the efficiency or dynamic movement of the compression. There's also a band reject, which is very unique because what it will do is it will compress outside of the range here. So the compression will be applied to the lower frequencies and upper frequencies. And I'll show you an example of that with an acoustic guitar where that happens to work out really well. You can create an external sidechain by clicking here. You could solo up the filter, allowing you to tweak in the high pass and low pass filter to get them exactly the way you want them. And all of this is basically designed to either feed the detection engine to make it more efficient or to help you shape where you want to apply the compression. Very powerful. All right, let's move into some audio examples here for this. I want to start with a snare drum here. Now, with the snare drum, what I wanted to really show you is the punch control and the power of the punch control. So I'm going to solo this up here for a second. I'm going to start with normal compression. So I have no leveler, just the compressor, 30 millisecond attack, and a 16th note release time. And so this is just the basic snare sound. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull down the punch control. So what this does, if you recall, is that it will adjust the level or the gain of the signal over the attack time. So this allows me to control the transient level relative to the rest of the sound of the drum. And you'll see the gain reduction go up, but you'll also notice a change in the character and the tone of the drum. And this is really what I want you to focus on. So as you can see here, what you have is something that gives you the ability to control the amount of the transient, and this sort of will help to set a bit of the how aggressive the snare will be, whether it will set back in the speakers a little bit or whether it kind of pull forward. Very powerful tool. And you'll see this as you go through a lot of different settings. You'll find that mostly you'll start with slower attack times because you have this control here with the punch, which gives you so much more flexibility than what you would normally get with just a standard compressor. You could spend all kinds of time playing around with the attack time, trying to get it exactly the way that you want it to be. I want to show also something here with the overheads, and this is just using a little bit of the MS control. So I'm going to start out here and I'm going to solo up the kick, snare, and the overheads just so you can kind of hear it all in context here, because that's where you really hear the effect of it. What it sounds like with normal left-right or with MS, and in particular with MS as I start to pull away the left-right control, or in this case it would be the mid-side control. So have a listen. In particular, I want you to, if you pay attention to, and I'll just cue it up to the chorus here where you can catch a lot of this, is the way that it affects the cymbals in particular. So when that compression is even on both sides, then it sort of swallows them up a little bit. And when I move it towards separating the two of them, it's like all of a sudden the cymbals separate from the snare, which is primarily what's driving the compression here. And it's very transparent the way that this works, even though it's pretty aggressive compression. And it allows you to kind of open up the sound. I did a similar thing here with the room tracks, where using the MS control kind of makes the size of the drums go a little bit wider and a little bit bigger because the pumping and breathing is kind of happening right in the middle, just in the center track. Very cool way of adapting and using this. Let's go to an example here with the acoustic guitars. I wanted to show something here where effectively I've used the band reject that I was just describing in the sidechain filter here. So what's happening here now is I have the band reject in. This is activated, and now what's happening is the compression is being applied below 95 hertz and above 950 hertz. So we got attack frequencies up here, and what I want to start with is the plug-in bypassed first, and so we can listen. I'm going to solo up the acoustics and raise the volume up here so we can hear them a little bit more clearly. And so have a listen to it bypassed, and then I'll describe the problem, and then we'll see how the POWAIR helps to correct the problem. I'm going to go here to the verse section where it's a little bit more dominant, the issue. have is with the two plugins, just so you're aware, they are linked together and grouped together, so the settings are happening there for the left and right. But what you get is, especially with the one on the right, you hear like the pick noise and the attack kind of hitting it. It kind of stands out, a little bit muddy on the low end. And now the idea here is by taking this and enabling it and applying the compression above and below, I can pull the low end and the attack on the top end a little bit more into the body of the sound of the acoustic. I can be more or less aggressive with it with the punch control. So you see I have the punch control in here, so it's really grabbing onto that transient, but I can find somewhere in between if I feel like that's kind of eating up the sound a little bit too much. You'll also notice that there's a little bit of a leveler action in there, and I'm going to get into that in the next example. But this is just like one subtle way where very transparently you can help to kind of pull a sound together just by using the band reject mode and applying the compression outside of those boundaries. And again, the punch control is a really helpful way of giving you the ability to kind of balance the amount of transient that kind of cuts through how well you want that to work with the sound. The next example here is a pair of solo guitars. So I'm going to play the beginning of a solo section here. In this case, what I'm going to do here is display the two plugins here because they're not grouped together. And what I'm using here is just the leveler, so there's no compression on the signal whatsoever. And the primary idea of what I want to accomplish with this is just to get this to kind of even out the performances a little bit more. Now, I haven't applied a lot of gain range on this. There's not a lot because they're not that far off from each other. But in particular, there's an area in the beginning that I want to focus on where the guitar on the left enters in and it kind of is at a lower level. In fact, I'm just going to tweak up because I felt last time I was auditioning here, I wanted to kind of get a little bit more movement out of it. Now, I have the responsiveness set to the standard momentary setting of 400 milliseconds, so it's not overly aggressive. And so you're not going to hear like any kind of pumping and breathing, like that type of movement with it. But just listen to it bypassed first, and then we'll put the two plugins in so you could hear the difference. And I'm going to put this in to the context of the whole mix, just so you can kind of hear the solo section. Play that again. So I want these to be a little bit tighter together. You could hear particularly the one on the left doesn't quite come in. And I could write in automation there and maybe deal with it pretty quickly. But this is going to take care of probably 90% of the problem. And then maybe I just have to deal with the final tweaks on there for the details. Let's listen to it with this in. So you could hear how they're much more even, and now there's just like a couple of tweaks here and there in terms of the transitions, but some of the parts that get lost in the mix, so I don't have to raise them up too loud. You can't do this with a compressor, if I wanted it to be faster and more responsive, I'll move it that way. And that's kind of the next example. So let's kind of move along here to the vocal. So what I have here on the vocal is one basic thing that everybody runs into. So a performance is recorded, and let's open up the screen here, and we could see here is a lead vocal level here, and during the verse you see that the signal level is kind of lower, and as you get out to the chorus it's a little bit higher. It doesn't look that dramatic here, but it actually shows up in the overall levels. I want the vocal to kind of sit pretty well in the track, so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get this so that I can even out the levels. And normally what I would do is I would go through with the clip gain here in Pro Tools, and I would sit there and I would dig in with all of the audio levels and adjust phrase by phrase, sometimes word by word if necessary, to kind of level out the performance so that it kind of sits evenly in the track, and when it feeds into the compressors that follow, it works pretty efficiently. And this is a process that can take, depending upon how much needs to be done, 10 minutes up to a half hour, 40 minutes. Just depends how, how far off like all the final compiled vocal levels are off from each other, just to balance it out. This does everything so much more efficiently with just a couple of quick settings. So what I have is a setting here in the integration time to be a lot faster here at 130 milliseconds. I have my target here set for minus 24.3. That just seemed to be a good level. So what will happen is you'll get mostly gain pulling upward during the verse section. So when it gets to the chorus section, as I play through, then you'll see that the levels will start to pull down here. I have a noise floor set here. There's not a lot of stuff going on in between, so it's pretty straightforward. But let's go over to the verse section and let's check this out. So I'll start with this out, just so you can see how much the level is going to change. You went your way, and I went mine. All right, so I don't need to play a lot there, just so you get the idea. Now let's see it with the leveler in. You went your way, and I went mine, drifting slowly down the road, walking the line, and all these cars are passing me by, and all these dreams, they seem like a blur, just like a blur, running out of time, running out of reasons, running out of money, don't know what I was thinking. So you could see how it evens. Like, I want the vocal to sit right in the track so I can keep the guitars loud and the power of everything. You can see how it keeps it right there in the middle. Now the sound is not perfect, so we're going to work on that a little bit with the second power instantiation. But what this does is it sets the basis from which the rest of the work can be done. And it's just so simple to set up and so fast to set up. You see there's no compression and just the leveler, and have a pretty broad range of about 10 dB because the differences vary that much. Although I don't think it's that close to going with that much gain, but it does even out things in an incredibly quick and efficient way. So the next thing I want to take a look at here is working with the compressor after the leveling. And so where I'm going to start here is by setting this up here. We got a punch control. We got the adaptive compression, which is what we really want to get into here for this. The target level here is not working in the leveler function. It's now working in a function to set the amount of gain reduction that's occurring with the adaptive compression. So if you recall, the adaptive compression will keep the compression more or less consistent based on what percentage that you set here, regardless of how dynamic the performance is. So as the levels change and as it comes through, it will adapt accordingly. So this way, if you have very soft passages, you'll get some gain reduction. You have very loud passages, you'll get some gain reduction. And using the engine that's built into the POWAIR, it'll be pretty transparent. So in some ways, many people use an 1176 in a similar kind of way that I'm trying to set this up here. With the punch control, I have a very fast attack time. I'll do some alternate settings without the punch control just so you can see a little bit of the difference. Very fast release time, which is in an all buttons mode with 1176. You get this similar type of thing, and it's a way of like compressing the vocal, and it always works best when the compression is consistent on it going through, that it's not inactive during periods and overly active during other periods. And when you get it to work consistently like that, It has this very aggressive sound. This can do a very similar type of thing, but without the tonal coloration that you get, which maybe you want, but if you don't, then this is maybe a better choice. So let's check this out. First, the vocal without the settings.
You went your way, and I went mine, drifting slowly down the road, walking the line.
And now let's put the Sound Radix plugin here, the POWAIR plugin.
You went your way, and I went mine, drifting slowly down the road, walking the line. And all these cars are passing me by, and all these dreams, they seem like a blur.
So I get that vocal to just sit right in that perfect place in the mix, you know, where it's embedded right in the mix, yet really solid, and you can kind of make out every word and phrase from it. Now, if I want less gain reduction, there's a couple of ways I can go about this. I could back the compression control here. I could also back the target level off, and you'll see the gain reduction here.
You went your way, and I went mine.
And that would keep it very light, or it could get more aggressive.
You went your way, and I went mine.
And that'll give you, you know, can give you some interesting results. I want to go here somewhere in between.
You went your way, and I went mine, drifting slowly down the road, walking the line. And all these cars are passing me by, and all these dreams, they seem like a blur.
And if I don't want to work with the punch control, which is effectively like a brick wall limiter, I could leave some of the dynamic in here, kind of back this off a little bit, and take back, you know, maybe half of what's going on. See?
You went your way, and I went mine, drifting slowly down the road, walking the line. And all these cars are passing me by, and all these dreams, they seem like a blur. Just like a blur. Running out of time, running out of reasons, running out of money, don't know what I was thinking. Trying to get away, trying to get back, trying to start again, trying to get back to living.
So I think you can see how, you know, dynamically powerful, how much control you have. The punch control is really amazing. The adaptive compression, really helpful in so many situations. Maybe this is not the best example for that, but I think you get the basic idea of what it does based on what I've shown you here. An incredibly powerful plugin that's just, it has a lot of utility functions, but also a lot of creative functions in it as well. Especially, I love that, you know, the MS processing capabilities. You can use it on mix buses, stems, vocals, pretty much any instrument that you can use a compressor on, and it will work just extremely accurately, minimum of tonal coloration, and just a load of power and flexibility, unlike any other digital compressor that I think you'll ever find. So great one, another great one from Sound Radix. They consistently come out with amazing plugins, and this one is no different from any of the others. And that's why it is the must-have, mixing with mics, must-have plugin of the week, Sound Radix POWAIR.